welcome to FAIR's free monthly webinar series. My name is Lindsay Newman, and I am the Family Services Manager for FAIR. I will be your moderator today, and I will be taking your questions throughout the broadcast using both the questions and chat features in the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. Please note that this is the only way to interact with us today, as all attendees will be muted during the webinar. If time permits, we will give our presenter an opportunity to respond to questions at the end of the presentation. This presentation, as are all of FAIR's webinars, will be recorded and posted on the FAIR website in about 7 to 10 days. So I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. James Baker is FAIR's CEO and Chief Medical Officer. Prior to serving as our CEO and Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Baker was a member of FAIR's Research Advisory Board, helping set the research strategy for the organization and reviewing our research proposals. A board-certified allergist and accomplished researcher with more than 3 decades in the field, Dr. Baker has been instrumental in the development and execution of a vision and plan for food allergy research, FAIR's ambitious strategic plan for advancing the field of food allergy research, published in 2013. Dr. Baker also has been a strong advocate for improving food allergy education, promoting food allergy advocacy initiatives, and increasing awareness of the potentially life-threatening nature of food allergies. Dr. Baker recently served as Senior Vice President and Global Vaccine Head at Merck Corporation. Previous to that, he directed the Nanotechnology Institute at the University of Michigan and was CEO of Nanobio Corporation. For over 20 years, he was the Ruth Dowd Professor and Chief of the Division of Allergy and Clinical Immunology at the University of Michigan, where he started the Food Allergy Research Center. He retains his professorship and serves in an emeritus capacity at the university. And with that, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Baker.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here today and talk a little bit about our perspective at FAIR and how we're going to move forward and try and help people with food allergies. First, let's talk about FAIR's mission. We view this as a tripartite activity. First, we want to support the life of people with food allergy to make sure they have the ability to live a safe and productive life, importantly with the respect of others on food issues. We hope to enhance access to health care, particularly health care activities that are specific to food allergy, like food challenges, and other state-of-the-art diagnostics. And finally, we want to give people hope. And most importantly for us is to develop therapeutics that actually could prevent allergic reactions to food rather than just treating them after they occur. Right now, one of our biggest problems, we have no way to prevent reactions to food. And in fact, many of the things that we do now aren't consistent or reproducible in the large scale. So we feel it's very important right now to get therapeutics that are available to everyone in every setting to try and make sure that we can affect the medical care of everyone with food allergy. So where are we at this point in time in January of 2015? Well, it's a good time to look back because, in fact, FAIR and its 2 parent organizations, FAI and FAN, have been around for quite a long time, almost 20 years. And they were started in response to an increase in food allergy that was actually pretty remarkable. And it went from what was a curiosity 35 years ago when I trained in allergy to, at this point, one of the most common diseases of childhood. The other thing that we've observed is, despite a fair amount of research and research support, we don't have a good reason why this epidemic is occurring, and we don't really have any cures for it. And it's not that any of the things we're doing right now is a quick cure on the horizon. In addition, we don't have enough trained specialists to take care of patients. You can imagine that going from nowhere to 1 in every 13 kindergartners means that we need many more allergists and trained people to take care of folks. And the other thing, too, is that children aren't growing out of these food allergies, so we need to take care of them as adults. Because of this, we've seen patients frustrated with health care and the inability to get treatment. And we really do need to work very much harder to get new therapies and new drugs for allergies that prevent attacks and not just treat them after they occur. So in general, there are real problems to developing drugs for new diseases. And when we talk about challenges in pharmaceutical or drug development, there are very long timelines involved. Often it takes many years to develop a drug and get approved by the FDA. And there's high risk in this because at each step in the way, a drug could fail. So in fact, when you look at people who invest in different technologies, they are usually more interested in investing in information technology because there are very fewer steps and a much higher likelihood of success. The expertise and funding for development of new drugs is well beyond the ability of any non-for-profit or even any large university of providing. So in fact, the only way you can get new drugs is through commercial investment. And the cost of development is therefore prohibitive without a market for the drug. And one of the big problems with food allergy is that people have not believed that there was a market for drugs. That's one of the things we're trying to change at FAIR, and that's one of the things I believe we will be able to change. So what types of therapies are we talking about? There are many different types of drugs. And this list on the next slide just shows you the different types of drugs that could be developed from the easiest to get developed to the hardest. If you're making identical drugs or generic drugs to ones that are approved, that's fairly straightforward. And the nice thing is that for the most part, the FDA is very forgiving in approving it. But the more complex the drug gets, particularly with things with biologics and vaccines, which are many of the things that we're trying to do for food therapy, including oral immunotherapy, which is essentially a therapeutic vaccine or natural substance, the barriers to FDA approval are fairly high, and you need to characterize these things very well. So you can see most of the therapies that we think we need for food allergy are very difficult to develop, and that has been a barrier as well to people who want to develop new therapies for food allergy. So this gives you an idea of the process that it takes to get a new drug developed. Preclinical development, which is usually done in animals or in model systems, often takes about 6 or 7 years. So before you even test a drug in a human being, it's 6 or 7 years. You then have to go through 3 sets of clinical trials, and I'll talk about these in a minute, but they go from sort of early safety studies to very complex efficacy studies. And these each take about 2 to 3 years. So we're already talking about 12 years before we even get to an FDA review. FDA reviews usually take a couple of years, so on the average, most new drugs take 8 to 12 years to get approved. So you could see that this is a very daunting thing and why it would take a lot of money to get a drug from the beginning to the end. The 3 types of clinical trials I talked about are very interesting. The first set of clinical trials are called phase 1 or first-in-human studies. These are essentially simply to investigate the safety and tolerance of single and multi-dose drug administration in humans. And in fact, most of the therapies that have been tried for food allergy have only gone through phase 1, including all of the OIT studies to date. This involves giving a drug, a biologic, or a food to someone at increasing doses to realize what the safety profile is and when people lose tolerance to the therapy. And it's usually conducted in healthy volunteers, not in people with disease, to make sure that the disease effect is not observed. In addition, this is really an initial characterization of what are called pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamic responses of the drug. And what that means is you check the level of the drug in the blood, in the skin, in the tissues that you need to get it to block an allergic reaction, and determine what type of concentrations of the drug do you associate with protective effects. So these first steps are really to just study the interaction of the drug with a normal human being. The phase 2 trials are different. They now test broader ranges to really see whether or not you can get up to a toxic dose. So the efficacy and safety measurements are much more intense. In addition, they try and develop surrogate endpoints that provide proof of concept, i.e., in an antibiotic, you could see if the patient's fever and rash go away, which correlates with the infection being treated. Controls are also used. And the problem with many of the phase 1 trials we've had in food allergy is that they aren't blinded. And if we're looking for an effect, we can be confused by our predisposition to think there might be one. So we have to do trials where the people observing the trial don't know which patients got the drug and which patients get a placebo or a non-drug comparator. And then finally, you look at drug interactions. You start using people who have disease, so you see if the disease predisposes them to any type of issue. And you look at interactions with other types of drugs patients might take if they have food allergy. So phase 2 trials are more complex. They require more patients too, anywhere from 100 to 500. Phase 3 trials are sometimes called as pivotal trials because those are the ones that really determine whether or not the drug works and really determine whether or not it's approved by the FDA. And these trials are fairly large. Most trials require at least 500 individuals. They're in patients with defined disease. You look to see if the endpoint, i.e. the clinical effect, is there. And in food allergy, it would be prevention of food allergic reactions. And you have to have enough people to show that the drug is safe to give to a general population. Often you have to do these trials 2 or 3 times to show that you get a reproducible response. So you can imagine that these trials are very large, very complex, and very expensive. The next slide just gives you an idea of the number of individuals in each of these studies. You could see initially there may be only 20 to 50 or 80 patients, but they ramp up very quickly. And some large-scale phase 3 trials require 1,500 to 3,000 patients. So in fact, to go through this whole process, you can start seeing why it takes so long for drugs to be approved. So if it takes a long time for drugs to be approved, when would you expect a pharmaceutical company or a commercial investor to get involved? Well, most companies want to get in after you have some data in humans. So if you look here, you could see that after phase 1, when you have at least safety data in humans, companies start getting involved. And then by phase 2 and 3, when they start seeing more data that might suggest that the drug works, they really want to get involved. And they usually take over the FDA review and the marketing of the drug after that. So in fact, it's often 6 or 8 years after you start investigating something before you could get a drug company involved. On the other hand, you really want to get the drug company or investor involved at phase 2 because that's when they can make the best return. They can see that if the drug gets approved, they will get, a payback on their investment. Whereas if they come in too early or too late, that won't happen. So in fact, both for the likelihood that you can get investment and for the quality of the review that you can get from having a true corporate environment reviewing this, it's important to do drug therapy. So the other problem is obviously the cost. People often ask me why FAIR doesn't just get drugs approved. And the sad thing is that FAIR's entire budget, even if we were going to put it towards drug approval, would not be enough to get a single drug approved. This is a real problem. And so if you look here, this is for preclinical development only. You could see that the total is $2.5 to $4 million. We actually have supported the preclinical development of a number of drugs. And I think that this has been useful in trying to get these drugs to the point where other people can come in and support the late-stage development. But I can assure you that FAIR's budget is nowhere near enough for a phase 3 trial. So in fact, even if we wanted to get drugs approved, we can't. How do people try and get around this? Well, one of the things that's done is partnering. And you've probably heard that the CF Foundation partners directly with drug companies. FAIR has not been doing that, but it's something we're considering in the future. The CF Foundation's been very successful with this. And in fact, the only drugs that are now approved to treat cystic fibrosis are drugs that were started by the CF Foundation and taken over by companies. Another way this might work is in the next slide. NIH is doing partnerships with pharmaceutical companies to try and develop new drugs. This involves paying for the early stage of development and then allowing the company to take the drug forward. There is a possibility that we can induce our NIH colleagues to do this for food allergy, and we're working hard to see if we can't get them to do this. But presently, FAIR is the only one that's supporting early stage trials for food allergy. And we've done this for a number of sites, including Stanford and Mount Sinai. So, given that background, given all the problems with drug development, how will FAIR work to speed up new drugs for food allergy? So the first thing we had to do was convince people that food allergy is the viable market that should be pursued. And you can imagine up until recently that people didn't think that was the case. So how has that changed? Well, first off, Mylan and Sanofi, with their epinephrine injector therapy, have both shown that this is a viable marketplace, and that even in selling a therapy that's only used in an emergency with food allergy, you could have a good marketable product. Two new companies, DBV, which makes the peanut patch, and Allergy Research Corporation, which is trying to standardize oral immunotherapy for peanut, have both shown investor interest. DBV has now done a public offering and has a market valuation of $1 billion, whereas ARC has been able to raise money from institutional investors. Both DBV and ARC actually now have completed phase 3 trials, so they're 2/3 of the way through their development, and they have agreements with the FDA that there's a way to get their drugs approved. So in fact, other companies can now see that there's a path to get the drug approved, which wasn't shown before. And the biggest barrier that remains are those phase 3 trials. We need many, many more patients than we can accommodate right now for a phase 3 trial. So that's one of the things that we need to do, and one of the things I feel is most important for FAIR to do, to make sure that if people want to develop drugs for food allergy, we can do that. So how is FAIR approaching pharmaceutical development as part of its mission? Well, there are two areas that I'll focus on today that I think are very relevant to this. The first is our clinical network and our new investigator awards. Basically, these are going to bring in new investigators and open new sites so that we'll be able to do the large-scale studies that are needed for drug approval. And then we're talking about partnering directly with the pharmaceutical world to help with the early stage trials, the way that the CF Foundation did, to move these drugs far enough along that people will invest in them. So those are the two areas I'm going to focus on for the rest of the time. So what is our clinical network? As you saw, large-scale phase 3 clinical trials take 500 or more patients. We currently have only about 5 or 7 sites that are actively doing food allergy clinical trials. We need to expand that tremendously. Most sites can only handle about 10, 15, or 20 patients in the trial. So you can imagine for 500 patients, you need quite a few sites. Even if they were able to handle 50, you'd need 10 sites. So these are unique places. What we're doing is establishing a network. We issued an RFA last fall, and we now have over 20 sites that have given us their credentials and are asking for our acknowledgement as a place that can do clinical trials. And what we're going to do is provide them funding to get the basic components required to do clinical trials at their site. And then we're going to steer the pharmaceutical companies like DBV and ARC that want to do clinical trials to these sites to get them done. So in this way, we're going to pay over $5 million to provide the infrastructure to get new drugs approved. As I said, we're also expanding the number of people. We don't have enough investigators in food allergy to conduct these trials. So in fact, we're giving a new fellowship award that we predominantly just gave through the Academy of Allergy and Asthma, and that's called the Gibbs Award. We're giving 5- and 2-year career development awards so young investigators can decide to work in food allergy and be supported to do it. When we announced these awards in the fall, we had 25 applicants, and we're hoping to fund about 5 people with the mid-career awards and 3 people with the early career awards. So in fact, if we every year can bring in another 8 people to do food allergy, you can imagine over 5 years that's 40 new sites and 40 new people. So we feel this is very important. We're also including more junior investigators on our review and advisory panels because they're the closest to the cutting edge science that really allows us to do new therapies. So how will this work? A good example is Viaskin, or the peanut patch. Viaskin is a type of peanut allergen that's in an electrostatic patch. And when that patch is placed on the skin, it delivers the peanut allergen to certain immune cells in the skin, and these cells seem to turn off the allergic response. Right now, only 100 people have been tested. But the nice thing is that it looked like it was a safe way to try and desensitize the peanut. And this has now been approved to go into phase 3 clinical trials, and we're helping them to find sites to use for this trial. So you can see here that with only 100 patients, they have now gotten the FDA to support the concept of going into large-scale trials, and people believe that this is one of the first specific ways to treat drug allergy. They'll be treat food allergy. They'll be approved. Another very exciting concept is a biologic or an antibody called dupilumab. This is an antibody that is being developed by Sanofi and Regeneron, and studies in the New England Journal have shown it to be highly effective in patients who have bad atopic dermatitis or eczema and asthma. And in fact, in almost every allergic disease, be it asthma or nasal allergy or skin allergy, this drug has been effective, and it's effective against blocking all allergies, not just one type or one food. So in fact, we believe that this drug could be very effective for food allergy. We're going to meet with the people from Sanofi and try and encourage them to look at patients with food allergy for this drug, because we believe in the long run preventing the allergic reactions and preventing them against all foods is really the way to go to try and treat food allergy. The next slide just shows how remarkably effective this drug is for atopic dermatitis. These are patients that have very severe eczema, and their skin basically looks like it's red or inflamed or burned all of the time. And you could see here that within 30 or so days, 90+% of these patients were cleared with dupilumab, whereas with placebo therapy, only about a third of them got better. And in fact, their itching went away as well, which is the other box. So in fact, if we had the same type of result with food allergy, in a short order, we could be hopeful that patients would stop reacting to foods. And that would involve all foods, not just one food. And this is just the final paragraph from the atopic dermatitis study, where it says that the commonality or the similar type of allergic response that underlies all of the allergic diseases looks like it's blocked through dupilumab. So in fact, this suggests a rationale for studying dupilumab in other conditions like food allergy. Three other examples of potential therapeutics that could be applied to food allergy. Anti-TSLP is another antibody that blocks inflammation in asthma and could block the allergic response to foods. Novartis is working on a more effective anti-IgE that might more quickly deplete IgE in food patients. And another company is working on a therapy for eosinophils that could treat diseases like eosinophilic esophagitis. So there are many things out there. We just have to make sure that we have the wherewithal to test them for food allergy. So finally, I'd like to reiterate our mission. We're trying to help patients with their life issues, with getting them appropriate health care, and providing hope with new therapies. And to get new therapies, what we need to do is broaden the number of people working in food allergy and making sure that people developing drugs have an appropriate way to test them. But I think we are on the cusp of having a whole new wave of drug development for food allergy. I think it's a very exciting time, and I hope you can support FAIR's efforts in this behalf. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Baker. This is now an opportunity to ask questions about presentation. We have had a couple that have come through already, so I will go ahead and field those. Hopefully Dr. Baker can help field them as well. One of the questions that came about was sort of how our research efforts translate and the trial process also translates to some of the therapies that have been ongoing, such as oral immunotherapy and other therapies beyond the drug market.
Well, right now there is no therapy for food allergy that has progressed past those phase 1 trials. So to be quite honest, they aren't at the stage where they're even evaluable as a therapy broad term. We have supported many of these trials which have gotten these things into phase 1. And what we'd now like to do is get the commercial sector involved, because they need to do later stage trials and they need to develop these therapies. One of the problems is that most of these therapies have been done at a single site. So it's hard to even evaluate if the results are specific to that site or applicable to other sites. So we need to do these studies in many more patients and in many more sites. And until we do that, we really can't evaluate any of the things that are currently out there because they haven't progressed far enough in development.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question that came through was related to the Viaskin that you had talked about, and they had inquired as to whether, if you're aware if any products that are similar are being tested or developed for allergens such as dairy or soy beyond peanut.
Yes. First with the Viaskin, I believe that they are looking at other allergens. Those patches are in earlier stages of development, and I think what they're going to do is try and get the peanut patch approved and then bring along other types of patches. I can tell you that ARC as well, now that they've finished their phase 2 trial, and we don't have the results yet, but they should be coming out fairly soon. Once ARC once we get the phase 2 results, if they're effective, then ARC will start working on other foods as well, including milk and egg, and I believe they're also looking at sesame. So there are many different options out there. They're just in earlier stages of development.
Okay. A few people from the community have also asked for if we have any information on an update for the status of the Chinese herbal study that has been taking place.
The results from that study have not been published yet. We're waiting for the results from the phase 1 study that was conducted at Mount Sinai with great anticipation. We actually paid $5 million for that study, so we're looking forward to the results soon. And at this point in time, based on those results, I would be hopeful, if it's successful, that it could be taken forward and that people would be willing to invest in it.
Another question that came through was about Pilam, and if there's any information on downsides or adverse effects.
Yes. So far in animals and in the clinical trials, and this has now been in several hundred patients, they haven't seen any adverse events, but it will require treatment in larger populations, and obviously they're going to have to go into younger and younger children if they want to use it in younger children. This was mainly in adolescents and adults. But so far in those populations with several hundred patients, they've had really very few side effects.
Okay. Another question that came through was related to NIH and their current or future involvement with food allergy research. And if you just have any information on that.
Yeah, I'm a good friend of Dan Rotrosen, who's head of the allergy branch at NIH. Dan is committed to helping develop food allergy. NIH is actually partnering with us in a National Academy of Science study to define what the issues are with food allergy medically and in terms of basically the incredible epidemic that we're now seeing. And I can tell you that NIH is fully aware of this and very supportive of this. And it was Dan who actually helped suggest to the people at Sanofi that they should try dupilumab for food allergies. So I think there's a strong commitment there. They've increased the funding for food allergy research. But to give you some idea, even NIH's funding for food allergy is not enough to get a single drug approved. That gives you an idea of the type of money we're talking about.
Okay. Another question that came through is related to the trends in the epidemic, and an inquiry is, do you think that the epidemic will continue to increase, and if so, will this create a need for more research based on your knowledge?
You know, I've been quite honestly surprised at the ongoing increase that we're seeing. It's pretty remarkable because it seems like every generation is getting more allergic, and young people with food allergies not only are more common, but their food allergies tend to be more severe, and they aren't outgrowing them. In fact, when I was at the University of Michigan, we had to alter the food service to accommodate all the freshmen who were coming in with food allergies. So it's hard to predict, but certainly right now the frequency has not leveled off at all in the past 10 years. The reasons behind this are unknown, and that's why we can't really say what's happening. But I could tell you that even if it maintains at the current levels, this is an incredible clinical problem, and we need to get much more aggressive with it. Not just in terms of educating food allergic people, but in fact educating the general public, because this is a common enough problem that they're going to have to help with accommodations.
Okay, great. Somebody had asked if you can speak to any research on the trend of adult onset food allergies.
You know, there are a couple of things that we're observing. There have always been adult food allergies, and in fact, they were to particular types of foods that tend to be very strong allergens, things like sesame and peanut. We're seeing two things now that I think are very important. Number one is that young people are not growing out of their food allergies as commonly as they once did. And adults with food allergy tend to have problems instead of just with one food, like peanut, with multiple foods. The good news is that all the data we've looked at suggests that the therapies that are being proffered for children are going to work for adults. And in fact, with a drug like dupilumab, it will be approved for adults before it's approved for children, because the safety in adults will be easier to evaluate, and the FDA will probably require safety in adults before children. So in fact, all these new drugs that are coming down the line will be first available for adults with food allergy, and in fact, were first tested in adults with food and other types of allergy. So even though we don't talk about adults as much, they're going to be the first beneficiaries of the new therapies that are coming down the line.
Okay. Another question that came through was, what is a good resource for following some of these drug developments more closely? Where can they be published? Will FAIR be publishing results of these studies, and so on?
Yes, one of the things that FAIR is going to do is that we're going to put in our quarterly summaries sort of a racetrack that will show all the drugs under development and what's happening with them. And I think that's important for a couple of reasons, because many of our members will want to get involved in some of these clinical trials. And so we want to make that available to folks. And in addition, we want people to know what's going on, what's being developed, what isn't being developed. I've actually had patients who've invested in companies that are developing drugs for food allergy because they want new drugs to occur. So FAIR is going to make this information known. We're going to make known where clinical trials are ongoing in our quarterly newsletters so that you'll have access to this information. You'll be able to contact those institutions and become an active part of this process.
Okay. Another inquiry that came from the field is related to the University of Chicago study that we've recently published information on for the Clostridia group of bacteria. Do we have any updates on that study?
We do not have any updates at this point, but there are a number of companies now that, based on that research, are interested in these therapeutic bacteria as a route to treatment. And there are several companies, a couple in Boston and I believe one in the Maryland area, that are now pursuing this as a way to try and treat food allergy. So we're very pleased that the research that we supported there is now being commercialized.
Great. Another question that came through is about treatment for reactions, and if we know of any research being done to replace the use of epinephrine as a treatment method.
Actually, we just funded a new study by an investigator, Dr. Fred Finkelman, at the University of Cincinnati, that has an antibody that could bind to different parts of the IgE mast cell component and block the signal transduction. And it looks like it has the potential of stopping allergic reactions even after they start. So that's very promising research. It's been shown to be effective in mice. Dr. Finkelman is now gearing up to get to a point where he potentially could do a clinical study, and we're supporting him in that. And he's also got support from NIH for that project.
Great. I think this will probably, somebody did just ask a general question for treatment on is it possible to overdose a child on epinephrine?
If a child is having an allergic reaction, the most important thing is to treat them adequately. And to be quite honest, you need to give them as much epinephrine as they need. I think the concern about underdosing is much greater than the concern about overdosing.
Okay. This may be a little bit too far beyond being able to make an estimate on, but somebody did inquire as to when you think, based on your educated guess, when these drugs would be introduced into the general population so that they could start immunotherapy for food allergies like they would for an environmental allergy, for instance.
Well, I think the first thing to be introduced in the near future is going to be dupilumab will be introduced for atopic dermatitis. So that will be generally available. I think that the patch and ARC's oral immunotherapy are probably about 3 to 5 years away. But the key is that they're starting the crucial studies. I believe that DBV is starting their phase 3 trials this summer. And, if they have good results, the FDA could actually facilitate the approval process. So it might be less than that. I think that this is a very exciting time, though, because we're actually seeing real therapies go into late-stage development in a way that we've never had this before. So I think this is a turning point for the food allergy community.
Okay. Another question that came through is related to advocacy efforts. Are there any advocacy efforts that are related to food allergy research?
Yes, we've made advocacy efforts in Washington on behalf of food allergy research. They've helped with funding at NIH and through the Department of Defense. I think that one thing I'd like to do is have everyone at their local institution do their own advocacy. We need to get all these medical centers across the country to understand that this is an important medical problem, that people need care, and that allergists need to be on their staff. There are not enough allergists out there right now to treat everyone with food allergy, and we need to change that. We need to support the training of more allergists.
Okay. This question is related to children with multiple food allergies, and in the clinical trial setting, will they qualify for desensitization treatments and other trials?
Yes, I think that even with things like the patch, they will qualify for desensitization trials. But again, you're desensitizing to one particular thing. The problem with trying to desensitize with multiple allergens is that everybody has different reactivity. So it's very hard to predict what type of mix of allergens you have to put together to try and desensitize people. So I think that there will be an opportunity here for these people. I think until we get testing with drugs like dupilumab that block out the entire allergic response, we aren't going to be able to try and address all their food sensitivities at one time.
Okay. This question is just sort of a follow-up question is, when you talk about healthcare, you had mentioned food challenges and allergen testing, and they just asked if you could elaborate on that.
Well, right now, diagnostics for food allergy are not what we'd like them to be. The most sensitive and specific test is actually skin testing. But as you're all aware, that involves putting the food on the skin of the person and usually pricking it with a needle. And there are variabilities that are involved with that because the skin can be variable in its reactivity. There are blood or RAS tests that are used to determine if you have IgE, but in fact, good studies have shown that only half of the people who have IgE on a blood test actually have clinical sensitivity. So really, the only thing we're left with are food challenges, double-blinded food challenges, and a lot of people don't do these. So it's been very hard to specifically diagnose who has food allergy and who doesn't. What we're hoping is that we can develop new and more consistent tests that help define that for individuals. And that's an area that we're also supporting in terms of research funding.
Okay. One question going back to advocacy efforts is a question on how does one advocate locally and what steps our community can take to help make our advocacy efforts happen.
Well, I would contact people who are on the boards of your local health systems and medical centers and, see if they can't help educate their emergency room so that they're appropriately outfitted to treat people with allergic reactions, and whether or not they can get allergists on board for their staff so that you have appropriate doctors to treat. Almost all health systems have local boards, and local, their board meetings, they often have public information sessions where people can go and voice their opinions. And people have been very effective with heart disease, with kidney disease, with cancer, in getting health systems more attuned to providing care. I think it's time that we do this with food allergy.
Another question that came through is are there plans for FAIR to be looking into research into diagnostics?
I just mentioned, yes, that we're doing work on diagnostics. One of the offshoots from ARC, OIT therapy, is that they've made a standardized peanut extract with defined amounts of antigen in it. And that alone may be a very unique and good diagnostic agent, both in terms of skin testing and oral challenge.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions. One question that did come through, which I know is part of our overall mission pieces, is while we've been talking about looking for about our research efforts, what is FAIR's focus on community education?
One of the things I'm proudest of is FAIR's educational efforts. And we have a large-scale community education effort that's aimed at different areas. One of the areas that we're focusing right now is colleges. And you probably can be assured that when your children go off to college, the first thing they try and forget is that they're food allergic. We're working with colleges to try and put together programs that are both supportive for people with food allergy and help to educate them about the issues of dealing with food, as well as doing menus that are safe for people with food allergy. We're also doing a teen allergy program that was remarkably oversubscribed this year. We're going to try and enlarge on that, where we really get a community together and these young people can commiserate and really talk with each other about the requirements they have supporting each other in the social aspects. As I said, we're also going to try and work to increase the access to physicians in communities across the country so that you don't have to go to a large city to find someone to treat your food allergy. And we have a number of other outreach programs I don't have time to talk about today that are going to extend our outreach plans, hopefully to every corner of the country. So I'm very proud and very excited about our education program.
Okay, and one last question, which was partially covered, I believe, when we were talking about advocacy, but besides supporting food allergy research groups such as FAIR, what else can the general public do to push for further research efforts?
I think we touched on this a little bit, and I think particularly trying to support your local physicians who are doing this type of work. Participating in clinical trials is very important. We need people with food allergy who are willing to try these medications in a safe way, and I think that you can be part of the solution if you actually do these things.
Great. Well, thank you once again, Dr. Baker, for today's presentation. Our next webinar will be taking place on Wednesday, February 18th, and it will be led by Kathy Owens. Kathy is going to present on the school nurse's perspective on food allergy education and advocacy issues related to student safety in the school setting. In addition to working as a school nurse for over 25 years, Ms. Owens has been instrumental in getting legislation passed in her home state of California so that schools can stock epinephrine for unknown cases of anaphylaxis, and she's lobbied on Capitol Hill for more support in schools for students with food allergies and medical conditions. Registration details will be available soon on FAIR's website, and above you'll see a link to our direct page for webinars where you can both register for next month's webinar and also access any of our pre-recorded webinars. So that will conclude today's webinar. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next month.